Now, we're going to talk some baseball for a little while. And who better to bring in than our friend and my fellow Mets beat reporter for this season, Mr. Sam Davis. How's it going, Sam?
It's great to be here, Dylan. Thank you. I'm looking forward to talking some Mets. They're in a very exciting team right now.
They certainly are. And so let's get right into it. So you were at the game last night.
Yep.
First game at home against the Padres. This is bound to be as electric of a series as the Mets are going to play at Citi Field all season. And, I was really looking forward to it. I'm sure you were as well. Take us through last night. It was a 3-2 victory. Take us through the events of last night. Jacob deGrom goes 6 innings, comes out a little early. Seems like an over precaution of some kind. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was just the energy, the electricity was just incredible. Just even before the game and during it as well, the fans simply brought it. You could tell how excited they were to be there. They knew, just like we did, how big of a matchup it was. Obviously, the Padres are a very good team. We just had a chance to play them last week at Petco Park, so we've seen them before. And having them come to Citi Field, obviously the crowd. A lot more people in the stands, the most since 2019, actually, as they're starting to kind of lift restrictions at Citi Field. It's not full capacity, but I think it was about 26,000. So they had a big jump in attendance, which was huge. It played into the electricity. deGrom was dominant. I mean, for a while there, I mean, it was perfect game, no hitter watch there. And then all of a sudden he did give up that first hit, but he was cruising through 6 innings, 80 pitches. And then all of a sudden, you're a little worried, a little concerned. It seemed like kind of a roller coaster. You went from very exciting to all of a sudden, what's wrong with Jacob deGrom? Nobody seemed to know. He was out of the game after only 6 innings, threw only 80 pitches. Fortunately, it's just precautionary. He says he's going to come back and pitch in 5 days rest, so that's not really a concern. But it was certainly a roller coaster because immediately after, then Castro gives up a 2-run homer. All of a sudden, it's a 1-run game. And these Mets fans went from electric and excited to pretty nervous, pretty tense. But I think it was a huge game for this Mets team to win just because being back in front of the crowd, lots of fans there. Obviously, deGrom gave you a great start. And to be honest, this team, I can't help but be very optimistic about them. They're playing great baseball right now. That I love their attitude, just the confidence that this team has, and especially those bench guys that I put in air quotes there because they're really not anymore. But with the way they're playing, and it takes a lot of pressure off those injuries and when those guys are going to come back. So it's all optimism right now in New York for this Mets team.
And Sam, you mentioned the bench guys. Billy McKinney is someone to me who has just stepped up beyond expectations. He's been electric in that Mets offense. You mentioned the Mets have dealt with a lot of injuries this season. And as guys start to come back, players like Billy McKinney, Kevin Pillar, Mason Williams, people who've had to step up in those positions, that's going to present some interesting lineup situations. Do you get rid of those guys once the people come back, once people who have been out come back? Do you think they have performed well enough to stay in a starting lineup position? I mean, Brian McKinney, 5 doubles, 12 RBIs, 4 home runs. That's an impressive stat line for someone who's just joined the team 3 weeks ago. So do you think he has given himself enough of a resume to be able to stay in a lineup once some of their hurt players come back?
Kelly, that's a great point, and that's something I was going to mention too, because I think Luis Rojas has a little bit of a problem on his hands. Maybe it's a good problem to have when some of these guys come back from injury. I'm looking at JD Davis. I'm looking at Brandon Nimmo specifically because you're already starting to see it. Luis Guillorme came off the IL, I believe, yesterday, and they're going to put him at second base because Jonathan Villar is playing so well at third base right now. You have to keep him in the lineup. He's not a guy that was an everyday starter come the beginning of the year. Now it looks like he might be. So that's an example of it already happening. And then Pillar in the outfield has been great. McKinney, like you mentioned, has been great. He has 13 hits in 13 games with the Mets so far this year, so he's been tremendous for them. It's going to be difficult for Rojas. I don't know where he's going to go. I think at the end of the day, eventually, guys like Nimmo, guys like Conforto are going to get back in the lineup and are going to be those everyday starters. But I don't think it's going to be just giving up their spot. Maybe Rojas will, I don't know, make it a little bit of a competition to see which guy comes out on top, because the bottom line right now is you don't want to screw it up. The Mets are winning ball games, and they're winning, and they're in first place, and they're playing well with the guys that are on the field right now. So if I were Rojas, I wouldn't be so quick to take them out all of a sudden when some of these starters come back. I don't really know what he's going to do. It's going to be a difficult situation, I would say. I guess my guess is that he's just going to kind of play it by performance. If McKinney continues to hit. If Pilar continues to hit, I don't think you should take them out. If those guys start to slump a little bit or slide down, then all of a sudden you think about when is Nimmo coming back in Conforto. But it's not a concern right now, which is really good. Normally with teams that are injured like this, it's like, oh, I can't wait for these guys to be back because we need to start winning games. The Mets are still winning games and they're not on the field. So I guess it's a good problem to have, I would say.
Kelly and I joined by Sam Davis, my fellow Mets beat reporter here on One-on-One. Now, Sam, you mentioned, the Mets winning bowl games and that being the bottom line. For the life of me, I can't figure this out. There's something that is driving this team's success that, like, statistically or tactically or tangibly, I can't put my finger on. It seems to be some kind of, whether that be some kind of mentality or some momentum they've been riding that is indescribably driving this team. Do you have any idea what it is? Because I don't.
Well, I mentioned earlier, and I think like mindset, what you just said is kind of something where I can point to. I don't think I don't think that's the sole reason why they're winning ball games. Obviously it's not. You need a lot of things to happen to win, but I think the mindset and the confidence, especially from guys that, normally are on the bench and normally just coming up and hitting once in a while, that's a really tough role because you really only, pinch hitting is very difficult. Coming up and playing defense in the 8th inning is very difficult after being cold on the bench all game long. That's a tough thing to do. And I think a lot of these guys are just really excited to have the chance to go out and play every single day, something they may have not done at all in their major league career, or at least didn't expect to do with this Mets team. And they're just excited and taking advantage of it. And now these guys are starting to get really confident, like Pilar, VR. I mean, you can go down the list. McKinney, Peraza is another good example. These guys are just playing with a lot of confidence is what I see, at least. Obviously, I'm not in their heads, but that's what I think is a big difference because, they say baseball is a lot of a mental game and not much physical. Well, I think the mental side of this game for this Mets team, they've controlled it very well. They're confident and they're on a roll. And it's only going to help that Citi Field is welcoming back even more fans, get the electricity going, get these guys even more pumped up, especially for a big series like this against the Padres. And they also have a couple of pretty tough series coming up, a lot of divisional opponents coming up. So this is going to be a real make or break period, I think, for the Mets.
Yeah, exactly. And the mentality is going to be extremely important, especially considering yesterday's game was the start of a stretch of 33 games in a month. Mm-hmm. That's averaging more than 1 game per day. So this is going to be a tough schedule for this Mets team. Like you mentioned, a couple huge series matchups, including this one. So I think it also helps when your best players are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Pete Alonso, he is on fire since he came off the IL. In his last 7 games, he's hitting 370, 393, 741 for his slash. So he has been so impressive. And we mentioned deGrom earlier at the beginning of the show, and I think he's worth mentioning again. I mean, he has just been so lights out. And luckily that injury seems like it won't be anything too big to worry about. But if you have him on your team, 0.56 ERA, the greatest start in baseball history to a season. I mean, it's hard to be real worried for what's coming ahead, especially when Marcus Stroman's your number 2 and Walker's your number 3. So they have the best 3-man rotation in baseball at this point. But what about the rest of their rotation? I mean, you have guys who are still injured, hopefully coming back soon. Syndergaard and Carrasco, they're slated for August and July returns respectively. But is it worth this team looking to get some help beyond those first 3, get some rotational help, maybe on the market for some veteran starting pitcher who's maybe on a bad team? Is it worth them looking to help what's already a very strong pitching rotation?
I think it's definitely worth them looking because you're right that bottom of the rotation is not very good at all. It's a huge drop off from those first 3. Basically, between Peterson, who has been terrible lately, to be honest, and Lucchesi, who is, more of an opener, it's back-to-back bullpen games, really, back-to-back days, and that puts a lot of strain on that bullpen, which I think is really concerning for this team because they're going to need those guys to step up down the stretch or even potentially in October. So I think going out and looking, you can't really get hurt with that. I think the thought process of this team is getting Carrasco back. I think is that primary. Syndergaard's going to be a little bit further away. They're not exactly sure what they're going to get. Obviously, he will enter the rotation if he's healthy. But Carrasco is a big one, I think. To be that 4th starter, to be behind Walker, that's all he really needs to be. And he's a very good pitcher. I think originally people would think he would slide into that number 3 spot behind Stroman, but because of how well Walker's pitching, he doesn't even need to really do that. All he's got to be is like a 4th starter. Come playoff time, if he is there at that 4th starter, this rotation is incredible, in my opinion. It's really good. So I think that's the hope for this Mets team, but there's no hurt in looking because you never know with injuries. Who knows how long Carrasco is going to be? It's been delayed. And then Syndergaard has also been delayed. So I think looking, it could be something they do towards the deadline. But I mean, I would be confident that Carrasco can come back and be that number 4.
Sam, you talk about, this starting staff, and you look at Jacob deGrom, who's been leaving games early, really for about 2 weeks now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's as much protecting his physical health as it is protecting that below 1 ERA, which I would too. I would be very protective of that. But, Sam, you look at this first place New York Mets team, and people have been asking me, I'm sure it's been happening to you too. People have been asking me for weeks now, what's going to happen when the Braves get good? What's going to happen when the Phillies get good? I don't know. And I go, I don't know. Stop asking me all these questions. But so my question for you here is has this team done well enough in these first 2.5 months to keep themselves in a divisional race when Atlanta inevitably improves?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know for sure. And obviously I can't look too far in the future right now because you're right. The NL East has been way worse than everyone thought, which is a big surprise. But I mean, the Mets are playing really well right now. So I'm not really looking outside of this Mets team at the division just because obviously they're not playing well right now. But in general, we get to see the Mets all the time. And I'm just looking on the field production about how well they're playing. And I'm very surprised. I'm very impressed with how they've been doing. They're getting those guys back from injury. Guys are starting to come back. And the starters that were previously really struggling are starting to hit, like you said earlier, Kelly. So I think they're in it in this division down the stretch. I don't see them really falling off outside of something disastrous, but who knows with this Mets team. But I think the Braves will get better. I think the Phillies will get better. To me, it's a shock that they are where they are. And that could make for a pretty tight divisional race, which could be difficult for this Mets team because the wild card in the NL is also going to be a pretty tight race, I would say, because you got the Padres who probably won't win the division. You have the Giants who are overachieving right now, but could be a wild card team as well. That NL West with them and the Dodgers is pretty stacked. So that could be a little bit tricky down the stretch if, let's say, the Braves or Phillies get really hot. And all of a sudden the Mets go from winning the division to just outside the wild card just because of how good the National League is. But I really think this Mets team is going to contend for the division down the stretch, to answer your question. I would be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if the Braves and Phillies come up and start to play better and play how they should, to be honest. But this Mets team just needs to keep playing the way they're playing right now. And I think they'll be in it in the division for sure down the stretch.
Yeah, and injuries are never a helpful thing, but I think it's almost a blessing in disguise that some of these other guys have gotten to play and have gotten a chance to step up, get at bats, get playing time, because later on down the stretch, when inevitably injuries happen again and you get later into the season and you go into a 33-game stretch like they're about to go into, it's so helpful to have those players ready to go, and you know that you can trust them, you know that you can put the bat into McKinney's hand, you can put the bat into Williams' hand, and you know that they're going to be sufficient, if not beneficial, to your team when they're up there. So I think this is the past few weeks have been a good experience for this Mets team in an NL East division that, besides them, has been pretty underwhelming. But like you mentioned, the Braves are going to get better, the Phillies are going to get better, a lot of baseball teams are going to get better as the season goes on. So I think these past few weeks are going to help them. And like any team, as long as you can stay healthy, especially your stars, if deGrom's able to stay actually healthy and those precautionary pullouts don't end up being serious injuries, I think as long as you are able to stay healthy, and they're going to continue to get players back. I mean, this is a team that's doing as well as they are without some of their key players. So if I'm a Mets fan, I'm chilling. I'm not worried about anything. So
yeah, I mean, just quickly, Kelly, I like what you said about these guys getting valuable at bats right now off the bench, because let's say come September, October, when all the starters are back, hopefully, or at least most of them, and these bench guys resume their role on the bench, they're going to be a lot more ready to come up for a pinch hit, to come up even to pinch run, to play the field defensively late in the game. We know how important that is in October. That can be, or even games down the stretch before the playoffs. That those at bats, those appearances off the bench are extremely important, especially in the National League with the pitcher hitting. So that's a really good position this bench is in for the Mets, and you got to be looking forward to that division. It's going to be, I think it'll be a tight race. It's not going to be, they're not going to run away with it, but it'll be an exciting time down the stretch for sure.
This is Sam Davis, our Mets beat reporter. He'll be covering Mets Padres tonight as well. And you know what? That might be a preview of the NL wildcard game for all of you know. So thank you so much, Sam, for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I always love hearing your insight, even though I should probably have the same, but you always put it much better than I do.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.